Okay, I got a question for you. Pablo's here. All right, let's say that following your graduation from Eastern Arizona College, you all apply to Arizona State University's W.P. Carey School of Management, top 20 business school in the nation, okay? And you all apply for their accounting program because just like Mr. Fox, you all want to be accountants. And you all take the exam to get in. You all have the exact same GPA. You all score the exact same on the exam. We're going to start thinking someone's cheating at some point here, right? No, so, and then, but they have a limited number of seats. So they take Tovi instead of taking anyone else because he's a Hispanic male. And their program is short on Hispanic males. So they have a quota system, let's say, in place, right? So we want to have so many of each category of people. We're not supposed to categorize people, but we're gonna, right? What do you think? Is that fair or unfair? Why is it fair? So you guys have, okay, so because you guys are all the same, they just have to kind of pick someone. So that basis, does anybody want to argue against it and say, I don't think it's fair, that that's a fair basis? Okay. What if you all take the test? Yeah. Uh-huh. Okay, well, that's where I was going next. Right. So now let's say, yeah, let's say, let's say, yeah, Pablo gets the higher score, but I mean, sure, he speaks Spanish, but he's from Europe. He's European. He's a poor, disadvantaged Hispanic boy from the south side of San Diego. Well, no, I mean, but like, and now let's say Pablo outscores him and his GPA is higher, but they still take Tovi. Is that okay? Why not? So what about the fact that Tovi had to go to this poor, impoverished school on the south side of San Diego? So he had no chance to learn the same way Pablo did because he's a rich kid from Spain. Does that factor into it? Sure. Maybe. So what I'm describing is something, do you guys know what it's called? Affirmative action. Have you ever heard of that? So the idea behind affirmative action is that, what's that? The idea behind affirmative action is that some people are just mean. No, is that some people may not have had all the advantages in the past. And so we're going to compensate for that by creating quota systems to say we want a certain amount of people in our incoming class to be from different ethnic, religious, or other backgrounds, or socioeconomic backgrounds, right? Things like that. And so some people justify affirmative action on that basis to correct for like historical injustice, okay? Other people justify it on the basis of what they would call the value of what's the word I'm looking for? It's a really obvious word and my brain just drew a blank. But the value of having a diverse group of people, right? The recognition that like maybe some kid who grew up, I know not on the poor south side, but someone who grew up in San Diego might have a different experience of life that they could share with the group than someone who grew up in Utah, okay? Or whatever, right? Or someone who grew up in Mexico, or who grew up in Solomon. No, where are you? Are you from Solomon? Okay. Solomon, Arizona, right? Whatever. And so some people, you know, and then the counter arguments, of course, are like, why do I have to suffer? I don't get to get into school because my ancestors were mean to their ancestors. I didn't do anything to them. And my life's not been so great either, right? Because you'll see sometimes there'll be like, where there'll be like historical disadvantage. And then you'll have like, you know, the child of like wealthy Black parents, but they get preferential treatment to this poor white kid, right? And people are like, who's been disadvantaged more over the years, right? And so it's really controversial at times. And not everybody agrees about it, but there's been some court cases that have said, in essence, schools, as an example, it's reasonable for them to say, we want to have a diverse student body. And so they can do things like that. Now, let me change it one last time here. Let's say everybody outscores the white kid, but the white kid gets in. Because the school says we don't have enough white kids here. Maybe it's like a historically Black college, HBCU, right? And they're like, they start this new diversity program. They're like, we think our Black students would benefit by getting some contact with more white people, because there's gonna be more white people in their work community than there was in their community growing up. Or, I mean, that doesn't exist that I know of, but let's say they did that. And so they put a program in that was like, we're gonna let 10 white people into this freshman class. And so even if all of the Black students outscore them, the white people get in. Do you think it would sit as well? Or do you think people would be like more mad, or, and maybe rightly so, right? You can make this argument, which I've heard made, and I don't fully disagree with, that, you know, every college is a historically white college, except for those few that are historically Black colleges. In other words, there's plenty of places for those kids to go. But the university would say, well, this isn't about wronging past or righting past wrongs. This is about the value of diversity, the value of you getting to be around people who are different from who you grew up with, which I do believe I've seen that in my life. It's been when I was in the military, very valuable growing up here in a relatively homogenous community, right? Even people who are of different racial backgrounds that grew up here have similar mindsets on life, mostly. Like, it's a small kind of conservative town. So like, even if you're liberal here, you're still kind of conservative compared to somebody from like, yeah, or New York City, right? Or whatever. Like, and so anyway, so that's part of everything we're talking about today, which is employment discrimination in the federal law. Okay. So this is just some historical stuff. I'm not going to dwell on all these, but these are some laws that have, so it goes back to the Civil Rights Act of 1866. That's when this started. People saying there should be rules against discriminating on the base. Do you believe that the law was passed in 1866 to prohibit intentional discrimination based on race, color, national origin, or ethnicity? Has there been any discrimination since 1866 in the United States? For sure, right? Part of it is, though, is human beings. Human beings are crappy to each other sometimes. Okay. I'm not saying that to excuse anybody, but recognize as long as there's been people, people have discriminated against other people. And the United States has a checkered history, but as does everywhere else in the world. And so, but so that early, there were people who were recognizing this and pushing to create laws already back then. So again, I won't dwell on all those. I'll just kind of let you see them. Age discrimination. 1972 was what's called the EEOC, or the Equal Opportunity Employment Act, which created the EEOC, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, who has the authority to I guess, enforce some of these rules and laws. 73, 75, Pregnancy and Discrimination Act. You can actually see like women got recognized as somebody you shouldn't discriminate against way later than race or religion, which is interesting. And then Disabilities Act wasn't passed until 1990. That's relatively new. That's in, you know, Family Medical Leave Act, Fair Pay Act. All right. So prior to 1866, everything was called at-will employment, which means the doctrine that the courts used was any employment relationship was an at-will relationship, meaning either party in the relationship had the right to terminate the relationship for any reason or no reason whenever they wanted. Many of our employment relationships still kind of work that way, kind of, okay? So if your boss where you work today just decided, hey, look, we don't have the money to pay another employee, they could just let you go, right? Right, but they could. Let's say like business just got really slow. That's a good enough reason. So that's without cause. You didn't do anything wrong. It happens, right? And but that is a reason, right? To say like, I can't afford to pay you. So the question is though, when they let go of those people at the mine, do they do so in some equitable way that doesn't discriminate on the basis of those protected classes that we saw through all those laws? And so if you use something like seniority, we let go of the newest people, then you can't really get in trouble, okay? Because you had a reasonable basis. All right. But then the Civil Rights Act of 1866, and then up through the Title VII in 1964, they created what they called protected classes, which means you can't be discriminated against in employment. We can discriminate against you in other ways. Like I can say, like, I only want to date like women. I'm not interested in dating men. So I'm going to discriminate against men for my dating pool. I'm allowed to do that as an individual. Okay. You're allowed, I mean, really, if you said, I only want to date people of my religion because I want to get married in my church, that's discrimination, is it not? But it's a personal level discrimination, like not saying they're worse or horrible people, but saying these traits are desirable to me in a potential spouse. Okay. So we always discriminate. Like, don't lie to yourself and be like, I never discriminate. But recognize that there's sort of like legal and justifiable bases for discrimination, and then illegal and unethical bases for discrimination. I mean, that's the difference. But the law says you can't discriminate on the basis of race, color. So even if we're the same color or same race, but we're a different color, I guess that happens to some people. Religion, sex, meaning gender. I don't know. It's all muddy now, right? We don't know exactly how that works. I mean, I don't anymore know the difference between sex and gender. And when someone explains it to me, I'm like, oh, and then another person explains it different. So I'm like, I don't know. Or national origin. So like the fact that it was like your family came from Italy, no, I'm not hiring you, or whatever. So it is illegal to discriminate on the basis of those things. Okay. So if I choose to hire Josephine for a job and I choose not to hire Auden, as long as it's like I have some reason, like she did better on the entry on the exam, or she had better grades in school, that's fine. But if I say I hired her because she was a woman and he was a man, I've broken federal law. Probably though, in today's climate, I could get away with that one, unless Auden sued me. I may have to defend that. But if I did it the other way around and said, oh, I hired him because he's a man, and men, everybody knows men are way more trustworthy or whatever, then everybody would clearly be like, whoa, that's not okay, right? So it is sort of a weird world we live in right now where we have to be careful, because officially you can't discriminate on the basis of sex, but unofficially, kind of like I said, like all colleges are historically white colleges. Well, all the workplace has historically been a man's place. And so a lot of these rules were put in place to be like, it shouldn't be just a man's place, it should be for anyone. So when we discriminate in favor of a man, people are like, wait a minute, right? You're just continuing to give advantage to the people who are already advantaged. And so, but that's not in the official law. The official law is you can't discriminate on the basis of sex, period. And we're starting to see that flow back. So where we are seeing a man, say, successfully litigate a case that says I was discriminated against based on my sex. So it'd be interesting to see how that continues to evolve, especially as like race becomes more and more mixed. Like many of us have many different races in us. And so like, what does that mean in the future? And it's like, it'll be interesting to see how that evolves over time. All right, so Title VII, Civil Rights Act of 1964, created, like I said, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the EEOC, who has the authority to adjudicate or enforce some of these laws. And then it was amended in 1975 by the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, which means I can't discriminate on the basis of pregnancy or childbirth. So I can't be like, I'm not hiring her because she's pregnant. Why do you think an employer might not want to hire someone who's pregnant? Because she's about to take 6 weeks off, right? Like, I get why an employer would be like, I'm going to hire you, train you, and you're going to be gone for 6 weeks. But you can't, that can't be a determination. That's the law, okay? Age discrimination, again, protections based on age. So that's now a protected class. Usually it gets enforced when it comes to old age, like discriminating against old people, not young people. But again, the law doesn't say old people. So we'll see more cases, I think, where somebody who's young is going to be like, I only didn't get that job because I was young. I was just as qualified as all those other people. But guess what? You can always say, yeah, but those older people had more experience than you, right? So that's probably, it's pretty easy to defend. And then disabilities. This is interesting because I can't discriminate against you on the basis of your disability if we can accommodate your disability. Some disabilities are easier to accommodate, okay? In other words, just making the building wheelchair accessible by putting in a ramp, that's called a reasonable accommodation. But like, say if we had to, I don't know, say somebody with a significant mental impairment was applying for like a professor's job. And we're like, well, you have to be able to like do the math. I think we could defend that, and I'll tell you some of the defenses in a minute, but it would stink to get sued. Like you didn't hire me because I was disabled. It's like, oh, didn't hire you because this guy did the math better than you. But it was because of my disability. That becomes challenging, but there's some defenses we'll talk about in just a second. All right, let's get done with the history. So there's a couple of ways this gets litigated, okay? The first is what's called disparate treatment. So if I treat you different than I treat her on the basis of one of those things, right? Then you can have a reason to file a complaint with the EEOC or sue me directly. But usually people file a complaint with the EEOC because they'll actually help you litigate if you want to sue me. So that's what disparate treatment means. I treat one employee differently or a group of employees differently, and it's demonstrable. So we can show. Walmart years ago now had a case where they were just not promoting women up into senior management positions. So they were showing like 70% of their employees are female, but only like 10% of their senior management are female. And so, they were able to kind of show systemically Walmart was not doing that. Now, Walmart could come back and try to defend it in some way and say, well, our female employees aren't getting a degree is required to be a manager or something, but they didn't. They just had to settle finally because it was true. They weren't promoting women. All right. And then the second is what's called, so disparate treatment. And then the second is called disparate impact, which means maybe you're not treating anybody differently, but you have created a job where it impacts one group of people more than another. Okay. So, or you've created rules in the workplace. So here's a good example of one. If I say, in order to be hired for this job, you must be able to lift 50 pounds over your head. Will that disproportionately impact women? Are there fewer women who can, I'm not trying to be sexist at all. Are there fewer women who can lift 50 pounds over their head than men? Yeah, that's a demonstrable fact. Okay. Sorry if it offends you, but it is. Are there women who can lift 50 pounds over their head? For sure. But most men probably can. There's some guys who can't. Okay. So here's the thing. If I put that rule in place and there's no reason for it, like say the job never calls for you to actually lift 50 pounds over your head, then I'm creating a disparate impact. I'm creating an arbitrary rule that impacts one gender differently than another gender. Okay. Now, if the job actually requires the lifting of 50 pounds, then we have a defense. It's called, and we'll talk about it in a minute, but it's called a bona fide occupational qualification. It's required for the job. You actually have to lift weight over your head for this job, and we'll hire anybody who can. And usually the best way to do that is just to give them a test, right? Say, lift this 50 pounds over your head. If they can, fine. If they can't. So just recognize that disparate impact usually comes about by having a rule in place. Here we go, minimum height and weight requirements for prison guards that had the effect of eliminating more women than men. So then they would have to go through this conversation of, should you have to have a minimum height and weight to be a prison guard? I don't know. I guess I'm a sexist. I don't want my wife dealing with hardened criminals, but what if she really wanted to? Would I stop her? No. I mean, she could go in there. What do you think? Do you think Allie could deal with a 265-pound inmate as well as I could? I don't know, though. She probably knows karate or something. We still don't want to fight a 265-pound convicted felon. Me neither, honestly, right? None of us want to. But I think what they're saying is, you know, like, how often do prison guards actually have to get physical with people? The answer is almost never. So is this a real thing? That's the idea behind disparate impact. All right. And then the third is called a pattern or practice of discrimination. And that's where we can do a statistical thing and just be like, so here we go, 38% of workforce in a community is Black, but only 6% of the employer's workforce is Black. Why is that? Or like I was saying with Walmart, right? That they, you know, they used a pattern to show that there was a disparate treatment of their employees. Okay. So we actually had this happen to us here at EAC when we were having a review from our creditors. They kind of came here and were like, why is this campus so white? And we were like, well, it reflects roughly the demographics of the community. And which was true, like, you know, like it was roughly the same, the number of white, Hispanic, Black, Native American students. But this accreditor was like, that's not good enough. So she wrote us up and we had to do this whole improvement plan to like show how we were like trying to increase diversity here at EAC. And it was, a lot of us were annoyed about it, but I think ultimately it was a good thing because it did lead to a lot of conversations and thinking about how and why, or do we just do nothing? Because I think that's kind of what we were doing. We were just being like, whoever can come, which I think is okay. But is it enough? It happened like after our football team left. And honestly, that was a major part of our diversity, was having 85 football players here. And, you know, and more than half of them were Black. That was most of the Black students we had on campus were just from having football. But our community is not very diverse, right? I mean, well, I don't know. It's an interesting thing. And it's another one of those loaded things that's hard to talk about because people get offended easily and stuff like that. What were you gonna say? Uh-huh. I don't know. I guess because at the time they made the law, you know, there was still the mindset that like there's one national language, you speak English. And I think that feeling still exists in our society quite a bit, but less than in 1866, right? So I don't know why that wasn't included. I don't know if it was debated when they were originally deciding what the factors should be. But it's an interesting thought. You know, should I be able to discriminate on the basis of language? Should I say my customer service person needs to speak good enough English that they can work with my customers who I expect will mostly speak English? Is that okay, or is it not? Is it a bona fide occupational qualification? Because certainly we go the other way and say, like, man, if I could get somebody who is bilingual, especially like in a community where we have a whole bunch of bilingual speakers, or people, or even people who speak Spanish primarily, that would make sense, right? So, uh-huh. Must be a no, because it's not a protected class. So if I said, you know, I want bilingual employees, specifically Spanish and English, there would be no problem with that. But, and I don't think that there'd be any legal problem with saying, well, we might get a disparate impact if we said you must be able to speak English to, you know, a certain level of proficiency, unless I could prove that it was like needed for the job. And you could see, like, if you're in a safety situation, needing to be able to understand each other, they get this at the mine, right? Because we bring in foreign workers from South America, from Africa, and everybody's working together, and you got to at least be able to communicate enough to be for like safety. Like, don't touch that wire. You're like, okay, and you get fried, right? Like, that wouldn't be good. But no, that's a good question. And, you know, are there other bases that should be protected? The most notable one right now that's sort of being thrown around is like gender identity and sexuality, right? Like, are we allowed to discriminate against people because they're gay or because they're transgender? And ethics tells us no, that's not a, you know, that's not right. But not every, it's not been added fully to the federal law, although it probably will be. Many states have added it to their laws. Yeah. You're a grown up. You can do whatever you want, Pablo. See you later. Everybody's like, oh, we can leave? I didn't know we were allowed to leave. All right. All right. So sexual harassment is one of the most notable, I guess, forms of discrimination. And employers are required to have a policy about what they'll do if sexual harassment occurs in their workplace. And so the most common forms are, the first one is what's called quid pro quo sexual harassment. That's Latin, it means this for that, okay? And it just means where somebody, like a boss, says to their subordinate, like, yeah, I can get you that promotion if you whatever, right? Or whatever, okay? So that's against the law. But also the second type is called a hostile work environment. So environment of sexual suggestion. So like, if there's just constant like weird flirtatiousness that makes everything uncomfortable at work, you know what I'm talking about? You know, like the way bros act in the locker room or in the dugout, maybe as an example. Probably if you guys are just hanging out saying stuff, not a problem. But if you have another person there who's feeling uncomfortable about that and voices it, then you have an obligation to like chill out. And if the organization knows it's going on, like let's say someone goes to their boss and says it's constant, you know, just constant joking about this stuff, and I'm uncomfortable with that, and the boss doesn't do anything, then the business itself can be liable. Okay. So hostile work environment is what it sounds like. Okay. So verbal and physical suggestions, being treated badly because you didn't want to date somebody or do something more with them. So this is just where you're actually being punished, like you're not being promoted or you're not getting the job. But all of these are where like the person doesn't have the authority to actually do anything to you. So instead they just make the place miserable and hostile to you. Okay. You cannot be fired for refusal to accept sexual advances, period. Also, if you're an employer, you can't fire people for that. Again, is that like, I feel like that's one of those things that probably doesn't need to be said. Pretty obvious. And managers and companies have liability. So if somebody complains of sexual harassment to you and you're the manager, you have to do something. I've told some of my other classes about a time I got sexually harassed here at EAC, and I went to my boss, and my boss thought it was funny and laughed about it. I told my wife, and she thought it was funny and laughed about it. And so I was like, I felt really powerless. And it was a weird thing because I don't think of myself as like like anybody would be interested in me in that way, and B, like a person who's a victim of things, because I tend to be pretty like, most people are like intimidated by my presence because I speak loud and stuff. But it was a woman who made some really inappropriate comments and then kept following me around and giving me gifts. And it was creating this hostile environment. And I was like trying to like dodge her. Yeah, I'd like go all the way around the building because I saw her in the building. I'd feel sick to my stomach about seeing her. And my boss was just like, way to go, stud, you know, like, because that's like boy culture, right? Like, yeah. But like, legitimately, I think if I had sued the college, I probably would have won a case. It was resolved only because the lady moved away. It stopped harassing me. Do you want to know what she said to me? Okay. Now, in historical context, it's funny. In the moment, it was weird, and then later, it was like uncomfortable. So I'm walking to get my mail, and she's talking to somebody, and as I walk by, she stops me, and she's like, "Aren't you that guy that has 8 kids?" And I go, "Yeah." And she goes, "My husband looked like you. I'd have 8 kids too." And I was like, "That's pretty cringy, right?" So I was like, "Thanks, I guess," right? And like went off. But guys, I have 2 daughters, and I hear that they have to endure crap like that all the time. Like I asked both my daughters, has some dude ever pressured you to send pictures of yourself over Snapchat? They both said yes. I'm like, really? So seriously, if you're asking some girl to send you pictures, stop. It's creepy as freak. Don't do it. Now, if it's somebody that you've known a long time, you have a relationship with, and it's like, because Snapchat by its nature is sending pictures, right? But you know what I mean, the difference between pictures and pictures, okay? Don't do it. It's crappy. All right. Sorry, was that too much? Did I lay it down there? What? Yeah, yeah. Like just like what did Bill and Ted say in their excellent adventure? Be excellent to each other. That's it. Just do that. All right. Don't discriminate based on pregnancy. All right. Don't discriminate on the basis of religion. Exceptions, religious organizations can discriminate on the basis of religion. So if I'm applying to be a seminary teacher for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I'm Catholic, they can be like, no, we only hire members of our church to teach religion to other members of our church. Okay. And the same for, I mean, that makes sense. That like, you can be like, can you imagine like a Baptist applies to be a Catholic priest and the Catholic church doesn't hire him and they're like, I've been discriminated against on the basis of my religion. And I think the court would be like, doy, right? Like, that's obvious. I'm going to apply to be Pope. And be like, what? You threw out my application? I'm already a bishop. They're like Mormon bishops. They're lame. They're like pastors pretty much. All right. But you think that would fly? I just turn in my paperwork and then white smoke comes out of the chimney. And no, not going to happen. You know, but man, like maybe I could convert, leave my wife, become a priest. And in a long time, I could be the coolest Pope you ever met. All right. So affirmative action, this is kind of where we started. So a remedial step taken to ensure that those who have been victims of discrimination in the past are given the opportunity to get work. Is neither required nor prohibited under Title VII. In other words, the law didn't make this. Okay, this is something that came about afterward. And employers can have affirmative action programs. But recent court cases have said they can't use quotas. I love this. You can't use a quota, which means we're going to have this many Black people here, this many women here, but you can set goals. And I'm always like, so just don't use the word quota. Just say we have a goal to increase diversity. And then you can, I've never known what that exactly means. And the courts don't either, honestly. So they kind of look at it and be like, is this a quota or a goal? And then their lawyer gets up and says, oh, that was a goal, Your Honor. And they're like, ah, I see. Like, really? Like it hangs on the choice of word. All right, BFOQs. So these are these last few bits are defenses to discrimination cases. So BFOQ stands for bona fide occupational qualification. So if you say their religion is a necessary part of this job as a pastor for our church, that's a bona fide occupational qualification. Okay. If we say I'm doing a movie about Alexander Hamilton, I'm doing a musical about Alexander Hamilton, so the actor needs to be white because Alexander Hamilton was, they'll be like, false, because we saw Hamilton and it was a Black guy doing rap, right? You guys seen Hamilton? It's actually pretty awesome. I really liked it. But typically, if I'm doing a movie about a historical character and that historical character is white, it's okay for me to say I need a white actor to play this white person, okay? In the past, though, there's been a lot of using white actors to play people of other, and that you've seen backlash now, right? And so now it's like even more so like when we make the new Mulan, we shouldn't use a white person to play Mulan, and we shouldn't even use a Japanese person to play Mulan because it's a Chinese story, right? So they try to find a Chinese actor. That's awesome, I think. It adds a lot of good things. I don't know if it's always sustainable though. We'll see if there'll be some point in the future where someone's like, can we please have permission to, is it going to be like if we're telling a story about a specific Indian tribe, it needs to be members of that tribe only that can play that part, or could it be any Native American? And if it does have to be members of that tribe only, are there enough members of that tribe only who are actors? That, that's what I mean. I don't know if it could always play out, but I do think it's a reasonable place to go to say, why do you have, if you think back to the old movies where you had white people and they're painting their faces Black, rather than hiring a Black actor, that seems yucky by our standards today. To be fair, try not to judge people in the past by today's standards, though. Sometimes, even if it's yucky, it didn't cross their mind the same way it does. We're all more woke. All right, so BFOQ. Should I tell them about the Hooters? Were you in class, the other class, when I was talking about that? So Hooters got sued, or had a complaint filed against them because a woman who was not well endowed, employed, tried to get hired to be a Hooters like waitress. And Hooters is like, no, because we have a certain business model and our waitresses look a certain way when they wear tight little shirts. And so she filed a complaint, and the EEOC came back and was like, in essence, Hooters' defense was, this is our business model. Anybody who comes to Hooters expects certain things, and the EEOC actually agreed. And so they dismissed the case, and said, apparently large busts are an important BFOQ of the Hooters business model. And so just, I guess that story is good because it tells us even if something is distasteful, like in a way we don't like, it doesn't mean it's illegal, right? They have, there are businesses that we don't want anything to do with, but they're legal. And so if they want, if a strip club wants to say we only hire women, they can do that. Or if it's a gay strip club and they only hire men, and a woman comes in and says, I want to be a dancer at your strip club, they could discriminate on the basis of gender as a bona fide occupational qualification. And just because you don't like it doesn't mean it's illegal. All right. The other defense is seniority. So same idea. We, if we have to lay off people, then we're going to lay off just the newest ones. I hate this as a policy because sometimes you lose some really good new people and keep some crappy old people, not old in age, but people who have been there a while. But people do it, businesses do it because it's safe. If we just say, you know, we have to let go of 2 people in this office of 10, we're just going to take the 2 newest and let them go. Nobody can sue you over that. Like that is a really easy way, but you know that you've worked places where there's some guy that's been there forever and he's pretty much worthless. That he should be the one they let go and keep the new person. So unfortunately, sometimes these laws, which are good overall to minimize discrimination, sometimes lead to decisions that aren't as good for a business because we're just trying to do the safe thing under the law instead of the good thing. Aptitude is another defense. So this would be a better, like if we could show this employee is better at the job than this employee. So, you know, so if you have a job that involves, you know, how many units they can produce in an hour, and you say we're going to take the 2 slowest people and let them go, that would be a defensible thing to do. Okay. Again, the problem with aptitude is you'll always have somebody who will challenge your aptitude test, right? Like my son trying to get into medical school, and mostly they look at your MCAT score. Are there other things we should be considering, like GPA, which tells a broader story of how well you did in school over 4 years instead of 1 test? Maybe how well you did in an interview situation, which shows how well you can communicate with people. Like there might be somebody who gets really high test scores, but sucks at communicating with people. We've all met that person, right? Some of us are that person. Like, you know, so no matter what you say as aptitude, people might try to challenge it and say, yeah, okay, I get that he can make more widgets per hour, but like my error rate is way lower than his. So which measure of aptitude are you using or whatever? And then misconduct. You can always fire people for misconduct. So that's easy. Let's see, like we write down each time you do something bad in your permanent record, and then we have to lay off 2 people. You know, the people who have the most misconducts in their record. That would be another defensible way. Even if they're, you know, even if they're the only 2 minorities that work there. But if you can show like A, they have more misconduct, and B, misconduct wasn't applied unevenly because of their race, because that's another issue you'd have to look at. We can use that. All right. And then this is the process. So if you are ever a victim of discrimination, the first thing you do is file a complaint. The employee has to file it. Okay. So if you feel like you've been discriminated against, like in my case, I didn't want to like sue the college, and because it's a great place to work, that was just one blemish. Okay. I file a complaint, must be done within 180 days of the violation. So it's too late now, can't go back. And I file it with the EEOC or the state agency. Then the employer is notified. The EEOC has 180 days to take action. If it's not settled within 180 days, then I get a right to sue letter. So in essence, the EEOC reaches out to the employer and says, you need to fix this problem. This person's alleging they're being sexually harassed. The employer can then like go to the person and be like, you're in violation, not the person who filed the complaint, but the person who's harassing. You're in violation of our rules. You're going to get this on your permanent record, and you have to go to a sensitivity training class or whatever their policy says they should do. They send it back to the EEOC, and the EEOC comes back to you and says, this is how your employer handled it. Is that acceptable to you? At which point you can say like, yes, or I want to appeal this. Because but if they don't do anything, then after 180 days, you get a right to sue letter. And then you can sue them. You can seek an injunction, which is a legal requirement to stop or start certain behaviors. You can get back pay if it's like you've been fired or lost pay, you can get that pay back. You can seek punitive damages, which means in addition to the lost pay, they have to pay you even more because of your pain and suffering. And maybe, right? Like at first I was like, that seems like a bit, but like when I had to be sick to my stomach coming to work for 3 months, is that worth something? Probably. How do you put a dollar sign on it? I don't know. Right. But anyway, and you can be paid for your attorney's fees. And this, when it says affirmative action, it doesn't mean like affirmative action, like we just talked about what affirmative action was. It means you can get them to take affirmative action, like against the person, or even like fines against the employer. Okay, that was a lot in that chapter, but it's important. Okay, if you're going to be managers or business owners, you have to at least know the basics of discrimination law, because you don't want to run afoul of that. If you're in a big organization like this, we have an EEOC compliance officer. So if we ever have a question, we can be like, hey, this situation occurred. Is it something we should do something about or not? We also have an HR department. So when we're hiring people, we can say, can you actually, if you get put on a hiring committee, you get like a little training, right? That says, here's the process, here's how we ensure we're not discriminating. But if you're a smaller business, you don't have all that. You're just having to kind of Google stuff. All right. Have a great day. No class Friday, because I'm going to be away. No accounting. And no this class on Friday. You probably, all right. All right.